let's talk about Fifth Head of Cerberus, an early Gene Wolfe novel. His second novel, possibly. I think it comes after Operation Aries, which he more or less disowned, and before Devil in the Forest. Either way, it's his first real novel. It's his breakout in lots of ways. He was a short story writer and appreciated for that, and he's a good short story writer. But this is really his breakout, and this is the first Wolfe book I read, long before I read other Gene Wolfe books. And we've just reread it with my reading group on Discord. We read a book every quarter, and this was the past quarters. And it is a brilliant book, one of my favourite Gene Wolfe's. This is the blurb. On the twin colony planets Santan and San Croix, civilization is a colourful mix of the archaic and the futuristic, with slavery and advanced science coexisting. The shape-shifting alien inhabitants of Santan were exterminated by the colonists, but some believe that instead they killed the humans and adopted their identity. In three interlocking tales, the secrets of this strange society are gradually unravelled. I think there's an interesting presumption there by the sci-fi masterworks lot that advanced technology and and slavery coexisting is a peculiar mix of the old and the new, and the archaic and the modern. I think for Wolfe, actually, he's interested in seeing how society develops, and he sees it probably as a thing that just can develop in any society. That aside, that's a decent blurb. That this is a sci-fi, and it's legitimate sci-fi. It's hardish sci-fi in the new wave style. That might sound like an odd thing to say, especially if you don't know the terms. Hard sci-fi, high concept, but with real kind of technological interest, and kind of, this works like this, or this is what would really happen if these technologies existed. The new wave also with 1950s, but particularly 1960s and 70s, more literary sci-fi, less of the high concept, hard tech stuff, and more characters, worlds, things like that, but often still coming back to a high concept, and that can lead to this convergence, the idea of what would happen if this technology or these technologies existed, what would happen if this existed. And so here you have shape-shifting aliens, you have complicated robotics, you have faster than light travel, of course, and you have cloning, and lots of other things that lead to kind of what kind of society might these create. One answer Wolfe has, which will be familiar if you've read the Solar Cycle too, is no matter how much humanity changes, humanity is humanity, and you don't escape basic facts about the human condition. He is, in that sense, not a pessimist, but he is a realist, I guess you could say. By that, you may disagree with his realism, but he's a realist. He just thinks, look, humans have certain strengths and certain weaknesses, certain predilections for good or evil, that do not rely wholly on the background technology and stuff. So what we're seeing is humanity, and say Dune deals with some of these same issues. Very different book and very different outlook, but Dune deals with some of that kind of same issue of what humanity is like with technology. And so for Wolfe, that's one thing. But really, this is much more than that in terms of its examination of humanity, because it's an examination of what humanity is. Remember what I've just said: cloning, advanced robotics, shape-shifting aliens, and many questions about identity and who and what things are. Like, is it, where's this person come from? What relation is this person to this person? Who is the real voice here in a particular section? And this is all against the background of a society that dehumanises as well. That Wolfe certainly displays slavery, depicts slavery as evil. At least slavery in its form on San Croix as evil and dreadfully dehumanising. And the systems that go into that. It's interesting actually to compare some of that to the way that Lieutenant Master Bujold looks at some similar technologies and how, both the upsides and the downsides of that. But Wolfe is interested in the idea that these technologies create conditions in a society that has other desires or predilections, create conditions for this or this, and that includes the dehumanizing of people. People are much more fungible, and you lead to kind of Kafkaesque elements in that society. But yes, that's the kind of the sci-fi theming and questions that he wants to talk about, and he does it exceptionally well. But that's kind of to bury the lead, which is that this is Wolfe exploding onto the scene, really, in terms of, and not for the first time if you read his short stories, he's experimented with this, but in terms of there's different narrative voices. There are many different narrative voices. This is 3 novellas interlocking, where you come to the end of the 3rd book and you are dealing with questions from the 1st book, characters from the 1st book, mysteries from the 1st book. It's Wolfe having voices be potentially unreliable in the limited, narrow sense that Wolfe has unreliable narrators. That can be exaggerated, but the way in which you're not always sure what to take from a narrator. He is also, there's interesting things about kind of the way information is put together, particularly in the 3rd book, the order of information. The fact it's because it's someone examining a bunch of records and he doesn't read the records in chronological order, so you're piecing things together, and this includes the fact that obviously he is using this device, structural device, to reveal secrets at certain times. So you're like, oh wow, oh okay, what's going on here? Oh wow, and then you get to the end and etc. He's using different genre form throughout, including in subsets. I mean, the first story is a sort of first-person narrative. The second-person story has this sort of fairy tale mythical element. And the 3rd novella is this person examining records, and the records have different genres within them. By genre, I mean as in it forms more of an epistolary novel. Is actually what I mean, rather than that literally he's reading completely separate genres. So there's a bit of that, and so yeah, you've got Wolfe mixing these genre forms within the 3 novellas together to create an effect where you are pushed back from, like, okay, we're up to this point in the story. You're pushed back and you have to approach it from a different angle with a different voice. And this is not something, actually, in terms of Wolfe and narrators, this is not a common trick on his part. You get I actually am trying to think of a novel. I think there's 1 or 2 short stories where you get similar kind of interesting ideas of who or what is talking and so on. And you have books where the identity of the author is a sort of discussion and complex. But this active multi-voice thing is not common in itself, but it is, in a sense, germinal of all these other questions Wolfe will ask through all these other complex narrators. It is something where you have to grapple with, well, what is humanity is a major question. What does it, how does one become human? Or how is one human? How does one have humanity removed from you? How is one seen as virtually inhuman? This is a thing that comes up looking at a particular individual at one point in the kind of the characters in that scene being like, is not even human, even though it's biologically human. How do you do? And we react with horror. Of course, there are things here. There are challenging things here. If you wanted to map it onto modern socio-political concerns in a way that is refreshingly apolitical, just it's if you were to say what's the implicit morality of this book challenging our views on X, Y, or Z? There's that kind of stuff, but I think actually I wouldn't want to reduce it to that. I think that's just an application of it. It's that Wolfe is talking about these high-level questions of identity, and he does that not just through the actual narrative, like, oh, there's these worlds. Santan is essentially a more technologically backward, politically more backward world, and there's discussion later actually about like why this is potentially, but this kind of world where and it's interesting actually. There's a point where Wolfe uses what even in the 70s would have been what we would call politically incorrect term for the natives. He calls them abos, which is a diminutive term for Australian Aborigines, and elsewhere. The idea that this is the place where they come from. St. Croix is this decadent New Orleans of the stars, and much more decadent than New Orleans. And so you kind of see these two places both in first person, directly first person as it were on the screen, and we also hear them described as from afar, by people talking about them on St. Croix. And you've got the narratives, you've got the worlds, you've got the nature of humanity, And he blends these incredibly well. It's a good example of Wolfe's early pre-Long Sun style. So essentially, for the last 30 years of Wolfe's career, he wrote with much more compressed style. Not always. I talked about this in Lupine Genomics too. But he begins to compress his style a lot to become ever more densely communicative. And that leaves some very wonderful prose. But if you want him writing really quite limpid, beautiful prose of a more traditional style, this and Peace, another early novel, are fantastic examples. Book of the New Sun, for those who have read that, though it is very much that more expansive style, is also unrepresentative because it's such a distinctive vocabulary and style. But yeah, this is a beautifully written book, many lovely passages, and as I say, I've spoken about them on the channel. I really love Fifth Head of Cerberus. I think it ranks in the kind of top tranche of Wolfe's work. He wrote 36 novels, something like that, and I think this ranks in very much in the top half, and possibly higher. I'd need to have a think about that. Kind of really, I've read a bit over half of his novels, so I can't fully comment, but it's in my top half of those probably. Again, I'd have to think. But yeah, if you have read Fifth Head of Cerberus, I'd love to know what you think. So tell me in the comments. Till next time.